Sunday Night Football. It was a thriller. Michael Penix, trying to keep the Falcons in the driver's seat for the NFC South and the playoffs. Jayden Daniels, obviously they cannot win the division anymore in the NFC East, but still want to get themselves the best seed they can going into the playoffs, and took us to overtime. So anytime that's the case, it's always very entertaining. Washington comes away with the victory, 30-24. Atlanta didn't even touch the ball in overtime. I hate that, but perhaps we can get into that conversation in a little bit. Let's get the top 5 players for the Washington Commanders before we get into all the good stuff. Wide receiver Olamide Zaccheaus, 84.2 overall grade in this one. He's having a fantastic second half of the season. Been a lot of fun to watch. Linebacker Bobby Wagner. Dalton, you pointed this out throughout the season. It feels the ageless one. It feels like is what we need to be calling him because of how well he is still playing at his age, at this late in his career. As the athleticism started to drop and coverage grade kind of started to drop a little bit, people wondered if it was it for Bobby Wagner and how efficient he could be. But man, he has still been a great piece of this Washington Commanders defense. Guard Sam Cosmi with a 75.1. Number 3, defensive tackle John Allen, a 73.8. And offensive tackle Cornelius Lucas, a 71.5. Jayden Daniels played hero last night. Once again, 82.2 overall grade. Then on Atlanta side of things, Bijan Robinson, the top graded player for the Falcons with an 82.1. Wide receiver Drake London, an 81.3. Offensive tackle Jake Matthews, a 76.5. Offensive tackle Caleb McGarry, a 73.1. Tight end Kyle Pitts, a 75.2. And then Michael Penix in this game, I know we'll get to a lot of ups and downs from him. 53.0 was the overall PFF grade that we gave him here in this one. What was your stat that told the story here for this game, Dalton?
So I like that you mentioned that the Falcons didn't touch the ball in overtime because they hardly touched the ball in the second half of this game at all. You look at the second half time of possession. The Commanders had the ball for 28 minutes and 17 seconds, and the Falcons had it for 9 minutes and 1 second. Total play count, 53-24 for Washington. And the big thing is Washington ran the ball really well in the second half. Now, a lot of it was Jayden Daniels, some design runs, some scrambles, but they ran the ball well. They found a way to get first downs, and the idea of it, I think they went into halftime and said, look, we're behind by 10. We cannot let Bijan Robinson take this game over like we did in the first half, right? Bijan had 15 touches in the first half, was absolutely killing him on the ground, had 2 touchdowns, only 5 touches for him in the second half. Not many touches for anybody for the Falcons because they never had the football. I think Washington, in their best stretches this year, they've gone to ball control. They've run the ball well. They've had balance on offense. And the craziest part to me is they scored 30 points in this game. Trevor, during this 4-game win streak that they're on, they have the lowest explosive pass rate in the NFL. They're not throwing the ball downfield. Terry McLaurin had 1 catch in this game, and yet they found a way to ball control their way back into this game. It was a slow grind, even in overtime with a drive that was, over 7 minutes of game time, and they finished it off with the touchdown. I mean, that's what it was. They went in and they said, look, we're behind, but we can't get away from what we do well. We have to control the clock. We can't let Bijan Robinson take this game over. We have to make Michael Penix beat us. Now, he did tie the game with an absolutely brilliant throw down the seam, but I like that Washington stuck with the approach in overtime as well. Control the ball, run the ball, just get first downs and methodically work your way down the field. Hell, it's worked for a team like the Chiefs all year. Why can't it work for Washington? And they just controlled the ball for the entire second half of this game.
Yeah, it feels like Washington's playing close to the best brand of football they could play going into the playoffs, which I think is a really great feeling, especially when you have a quarterback like Jayden Daniels. Who knows what could happen? An upset in the first round, second round, wherever it is for the Commanders. I think you got to feel good about where they are, certainly in year 1 of this regime, year 1 of Jayden Daniels. And so I think that this was another game that gives them a lot of confidence going into last week of the season and into the playoffs. I do want to talk about Michael Penix, and I'm going to wrap up my stat that told the story and my most impressive sort of in one, because it tells the story, I think, the way that we need to here with Michael Penix. I'll start with most impressive, and it's Michael Penix throws on 4th down there in that fourth quarter. It was not just the touchdown to Kyle Pitts, which I thought was an excellent throw to him on that 4th and 13 situation where it was 4th and goal, game's on the line, you complete it, you tie the game up, you don't, the game is over. There it is, all the pressure right there. But even before that, the 4th and 11, okay, maybe the situation wasn't as dire. You had a couple of timeouts to you, so that was okay. But we'll get to timeouts in a second. 2 minutes and 30 seconds left on the clock. It was 4th and 11, and he still fires a very accurate pass, albeit to an open Drake London. I think the play design was very nice by Zach Robinson there to get him open against that type of coverage, but was able to complete that pass right there. So I was really impressed with back against the wall, fourth quarter on the road, Michael Penix, He completed those 2 big 4th down passes, one of them being the touchdown that ended up tying up the game. You got to feel really good about that if you're a Falcons fan. I know that it stings because now you've relinquished control of the division to the Buccaneers and you no longer control your own destiny in that regard. But this season, you felt like it was sort of a building block anyways. It wasn't supposed to be going into the year. It was supposed to be maybe your division to lose. But when Kirk Cousins started playing the way that unfortunately he did, it felt like that wasn't going to be the case. So to me, the more important thing is how Michael Penix looks in this one. Those 2 throws on 4th down shows me that clutch gene, shows me that he has the ability to step up in those big moments like we saw him do so many times at Washington over the last 2 years. And then my stat that told the story here was once again Michael Penix, but it was the adjusted completion percentage. For as much as I praise him for those 2 4th down throws that he made, there were too many throws that he missed. 55.9% adjusted completion percentage, and there were just too many throws that hit the ground, went over a receiver's head, didn't really give his guys a chance to make something happen. That adjusted completion percentage, just for reference for everybody, normally that's somewhere around, low to mid 70s. If you're a really great quarterback, really accurate, you're kind of high 70s, maybe even low 80s, right around 80%. 55.9 of an adjusted completion percentage is not going to win you many football games in this league. So where I loved the couple of throws when his back was against the wall to showcase what he could be moving forward, the reason why they did not win this football game is because he wasn't good enough on a down-to-down basis when it came to completing those passes and giving his wide receivers a chance. So that's what I thought about Michael Penix with my stat that told the story and most impressive there.
Yeah, no, and I think you're going to get that out of a guy who's making his second career start and late in the season when he didn't get many reps with the ones all year in practice.
Exactly.
I thought there were times, too, where you saw some of that miscommunication. The first interception, for sure, early in the game, we saw sort of, I think him and the receiver saw 2 different things in coverage. I think you have a guy that, 1, is still a rookie making his second start, and 2, is figuring out the chemistry and how to play with all these guys on the fly in the middle of a playoff chase. So, I think it was up and down for sure from Penix, and I think still even through this and the grading and all of that, I think we've seen through 2 starts. 1, he looks like he feels like he belongs on the football field, right? He looks comfortable even though he's missing some throws, and man, he can make every single throw on the field. When his feet are set in the pocket, he can absolutely rip them outside the numbers, sideline to sideline. Anywhere you need the ball to go, Penix can get it there, and I'm really actually excited to see him try to bounce back next week against Carolina with still a lot to play for. Look, we all are going to assume the Bucs are going to beat the Saints, but you can never assume anything. We saw that with some other teams yesterday as well, so I think with a lot still to play for, him to bounce back against a defense like Carolina, this was going to be a tough environment to win anyway. The Washington, that stadium was just jacked up for them. It's their best season they've had in over 30 years. Jayden Daniels doing what he does, and Penix, I still give him a lot of credit for going down and tying the game. He just never got a shot to have the ball in overtime. So up and down for sure, but my most impressive look, I said it last week, Jayden Daniels in the clutch, it's just unreal at this point. I mean, you're talking about, you look at his stats in this game, 4th quarter and overtime, 86.2 passing grade, 80.4 rushing grade, 7-10 with 72 and a big-time throw through the air, 8 carries, 51 yards, 6 forced missed tackles on 8 carries. I mean, he just decided at this point, especially with Penix tying the game late, he had to put this team on his back, and he's done it several times this year. We've seen there was a comeback earlier in the year against the Giants, a game-winning drive. There was the Hail Mary. There was last week against Philly. This week now, I mean, he is just the heart and soul and everything of this team, especially when it matters most. In the design run game, outside him, the running backs weren't fantastic in this game. Again, Terry McLaurin, A.J. Terrell shut him down. And Terry McLaurin was not getting open in man-to-man in this game. He had to find other guys. They haven't been creating a ton of deep passes lately, even during this 4-game win streak, but he's managing the game. He's getting first downs. And honestly, I think the last 2 weeks he's just taken just a do-whatever-it-takes mentality. And in the 4th quarter and overtime this season, 3rd in overall grade behind Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow, 2nd in passing grade behind Burrow. There have not been many quarterbacks better in the clutch than Jayden Daniels, and I know obviously clutch isn't always something we can quantifiably measure. It's kind of hard, right? But you can see he's the heart and soul of this team, and he has been all season, and he is the number one reason that they're going to the playoffs.
Let's get to your most disappointing, because I do want to have the timeout discussion with Raheem Morris, and I think it's a bigger conversation that I'll talk about with most disappointing. But who is your most disappointing here before we get to that?
It's just in general, outside of A.J. Terrell, who I mentioned had a really good game, the rest of the Falcons coverage unit, lately we've talked about the last few weeks, they have found a pass rush. 4 of their 6 highest graded pass rush games have come in the last 4 weeks. After, 11, 12 weeks of not having a pass rush. Now the Falcons have it, and the coverage fell apart. They've lost 5 of their last 7 games. In those 5 games, their coverage grade is 48.9. Guys like D. Alford, Justin Simmons, Jesse Bates, we finally, we spent all season crying that they didn't have a pass rush. They get a pass rush, now the coverage falls apart. It fell apart when they really needed it not to in this game. They just couldn't find any answers, to not give up first downs, especially late in the game. I just think at this point we're looking at a Falcons defense. To me, that's actually the biggest reason they lost this game. I know Penix had to manage and battle through some inaccuracy, but I don't think we've seen a single game this year. Maybe the Charger game, and they lost that game anyway, and they forced a bunch of turnovers, right? But they have not put together a complete defensive effort at all 3 levels, I don't think, in any game this season, and this was, again, the case. And they finally got a pass rush. They got 5 sacks on Daniels, but they just couldn't cover on the back end.
My most disappointing has to do with Raheem Morris and the timeouts, but it's kind of more than that. So in this situation, Raheem Morris doesn't call the timeouts near the end of the first half, which I think a lot of people criticize there, but it's really the second half, not used to that one timeout where they complete a pass, they get the ball at their own 45-yard line, so not quite at the 50, but almost at the 50-yard line. There's 34 seconds left. There's 34 seconds left when they could have called that timeout. I think the ball was technically completed with 35 seconds left. But if you get that timeout in very quickly, you're going to have 34 seconds left on the clock. They've got 2 timeouts at that point. 2, not even 1. It's not like this is their lone timeout. They've got 2 timeouts. They opt to not call one and let 17, 18 seconds burn off the clock before an incompletion. I don't understand why you're doing this. I don't understand how we're not how do you not have a coach or somebody next to you that right before the drive begins, you go, hey, by the way, we've got 2 timeouts. I mean, I feel like an overall framework. Now, situations are not this cut and dry, but an overall framework is if you have 3 timeouts left and you have 3 timeouts to operate with when you're operating a 2-minute drill or whatever, you got to get in the end zone, you got to score. You call a timeout at the 1-minute mark, right? I think that could be a landmark for you. Now, again, it doesn't have to be that. Depending on how the game's going, you can kind of get around that. Or, if you ran the ball, if it was an incompletion, whatever, you can call one at the 1-minute mark. You call one at the 30-second mark. And then you have the 30 seconds to get comfortable with having that last timeout. If you have 2 timeouts left, the 30-second, the 33, 30-second, I mean, it should be a very, very clear and obvious call the timeout. And after the game, Raheem Morris said, well, I was hoping that we would go a little bit faster there. I thought the Falcons went pretty quick, right? I mean, it wasn't like a spike type of a thing. You know that you have to get a play in, you're running a play, but understanding that they had to get a play in, he had to communicate that, they had to get lined up, they had to get the ball snapped. 17 seconds ain't that slow. That's basically what it would have been anyways. You had all of that time run off the clock just for no reason. A head coach is not really like a one-size-fits-all. I know there's not an exact blueprint to a great head coach, but the more we have these conversations, the more I watch some of these clock management and timeout and just in-game blunders from some of these coaches. And then also, we're going to talk about this as the show goes on, a lot of culture stuff with a lot of these teams just going sour and not being able to manage the roster and get the roster motivated and have them, focused at all times, no matter what the record is, no matter what the situation is. The more I feel like I don't even care about what kind of a coordinator this coach was. Obviously, if you want him to call plays, you think about that. But I'm not just using this because it's a Buccaneer example. I think about what Bruce Arians was for the Buccaneers. And there's a lot of things that made that situation right. And Bruce didn't always handle timeouts correctly. I understand that too. But Bruce Arians was a CEO type of head coach. He commanded respect out of the entire coaching staff and the entire roster every week at any point in the season or the offseason. He understood how to build that culture and command that respect. And then I felt like he was able to make some good decisions when it came to clock management, time management, things like that. Not that it was perfect. I'm not trying to say that it was, but the more that we do this, the more I just feel as though that type of a head coach is actually the ones that we should be prioritizing, not necessarily the ones that are the great play callers like it feels like we obviously do. But, having a CEO head coach is less quantifiable. It's much more difficult to manage than it is, this guy called good plays for a good offense or a good defense or something like that. But last night was just another frustrating example of these head coaches, these coaches in the NFL, they are so smart. These dudes are so smart. They know football so well. And yet week after week, year after year, they just cannot get timeouts right. It's just so frustrating. And I felt like it could have very well cost the Falcons last night.
Yeah, no, I think it did, honestly. I think you're talking about a scenario where you still have to know, with the long completion and 33, 34 seconds left when I believe it was Darnell Mooney went down there. You just, there is almost a simple part of it where you have to understand, even if you're trying to run a play, the natural amount of time it takes to run. It's going to take 15 seconds for everybody to get back, get lined up, get a play call in. And even so, like you mentioned, the players executed it pretty well as far as the timing, but that's the problem is with 2 timeouts in your pocket, understanding, that 15 seconds that we could have saved, that's at least 2 more plays, if not 3, right? And then you're sitting there as a consequence settling for a 56-yard field goal, which you were kind of lucky to get into anyway with the penalty. But no, I'm with you. I think, look, situational football is everything in the NFL. In a league where 60 to 65% of games are decided by one score, it's everything. It's very rare. There's only a handful of games a year where teams walk out there and they only just win because they're more talented, right? Situationals, they talk about it all the time. Third down, red zone, we talk about every week with somebody here. Clock management, timeout management, all of that stuff, it all matters. And you could make one mistake. That's how thin the margin of error is in the NFL, especially between 2 teams that are this even. So I think it was a costly mistake not calling the timeout there. If you have 34 seconds at your own 45-yard line, I should say, somewhere around there, and 1 timeout still to go, that's a lot of plays you can run in that time frame, especially with the middle of the field open, and could have earned your way to something way easier than a 56-yarder.